What's the secret to recruiting in this modern era of running restaurants?
Whew, that's a big question. One overarching opportunity that I see across the board is representing who your brand is really clearly and also not being afraid to represent what it's not.
Welcome to Digital Hospitality. I am your host, Shawn Walchef. This is a Cali BBQ Media production. We believe that every business, especially brick and mortar businesses, need to be digital first. And we also believe that every business is in the hospitality business, whether they know it or not. We had this crazy idea back in 2017 when we started this show, this deep thesis that technology connected all of us, that I wasn't alone as a restaurant owner who was curious, wanting to ask questions, wanting to learn from smart people. We started doing this show, and now we've had so many incredible restaurateurs, entrepreneurs, marketing professionals, sales professionals, people that believe in technology. And today, I'm really excited because we get to talk about human resources. We get to talk about the people behind the people. We have Sarah Diehl, who is the founder principal at Empowered Hospitality. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sean. I'm so happy to be here, and I love to bring a little HR flavor to the conversation.
Well, on your website, you guys say that you hire HR nerds. Are you an HR nerd?
I admittedly and proudly, I am an HR nerd. Absolutely.
Tell me more. Like, I mean, we are always deeply inspired by people that are passionate. To be passionate about HR. I mean, we have people on the show that are passionate about inventory, and I know inventory is a difficult thing to talk about, but we need inventory in restaurants, and we certainly need human resources. Can you share a little bit
Yeah.
about your HR journey?
Yeah, sure. And I think that's what it's about for me. Being a nerd is just being an unashamed fanatic about a particular topic. And I, having started in operations and been a GM and kind of experienced what it was like to be on an island without HR support, leading a team of 100 employees, many of whom were older than me. I
Yeah.
felt firsthand what that was like. And so part of why I'm such a geek about HR is there are a lot of folks out there who are experiencing the exact same thing I went through when I was in operations. And I want to make sure that, we as a company at Empowered can give them that support that they're lacking. And HR is about much more than just back office processes and some of the things people might think of as HR. It's about culture. It's about maximizing your team's performance. It's about ultimately driving business performance, right? So it really is such a key part of the equation when it comes to running any business, but in restaurants in particular, a customer facing business and one where your employees have to feel appreciated and inspired at work. I mean, that's what it's all about.
Can you bring us back to your aha moment when you created Empowered? Kind of like
Yeah.
going through that journey.
So I started my career in operations, as I mentioned. I worked with Hillstone Restaurant Group for about 5 years and had transitioned into HR and training after discovering that that was my passion among all the other aspects of operating a restaurant business. And actually was laid off in late 2016,
Mm.
right before the holidays. And
Wow.
so Empowered grew out of that experience for me of interviewing for new jobs, actually. And I had met with many small restaurant groups that had posted ads for HR directors. But in speaking with them, I realized that A, they didn't have the budget for a full-time HR director, and often they didn't even really know what HR should be doing or kind of what value HR should add to their business. And so I pivoted a lot of those conversations into recruiting or to consulting engagements,
Yep.
and that was really how Empowered was born. And it was just me by myself for about 8 months. And in August of 2017, I hired our first employee.
Wow.
And that was a game changer for me because I
You
went
became
from
empowered.
I became empowered. For me, it's like sharing the experience of supporting all these businesses with someone else and building something, building a platform that could do more than I could do personally, really became a driving purpose.
I think what's interesting, just you sharing your story. I mean, we're building a media company on top of our restaurant. And the more that I've added positions, the more that I've realized how much more work we need to do. Kind of like, how are we doing? How is Stover, who's going to be editing and producing this episode, how is he doing it without Mike and without Aaron and without all the moving pieces, without Kyle? How did we do it? But, to your point, I would love to talk about job codes, because you're saying, especially in restaurant groups, because restaurant groups, we really don't know what we need until we really need it. Like, we're not proactive in thinking about our org chart. Like, it's just not
Yeah,
something that we ever talk about. Recently, we went through the exercise. Howard Solomon, who's part of our team, we're starting to figure out, like, what does the Cali BBQ org chart look like, and what does the Cali BBQ Media org chart, and how does this whole thing, this ecosystem, but if you don't put it on
yes,
paper, what are we talking about? Like, people don't know how the other parts are supposed to interact with one another. Can you share just a little
yeah.
bit about, job titles, I guess? Let's start there.
Yeah. Oh man, it's a huge question, and it's one of the most important decisions that a growing business can make, which roles to add when. And I think, sometimes what happens, very often actually, what happens in growing restaurant group is you're saying, okay, let me look at the people I have, and how can I maximize those people, right? How can I put aces in their places and continue growing my business while getting the most out of my current team?
Yeah.
And the kind of fallacy around that thought process is you're not taking a step back necessarily to say, here's where I want to get to, and recognizing that you might not have the right people on your team currently to get there. So, what we do very often is we want to reverse engineer that whole process. And we want to say instead, well, what's the long term vision here? Let's make sure there's a clear vision for where you want to get to. And then the second step is to say, well, what objectively are the roles that you're going to need to achieve that vision? And that might look very different from your current team. But the good news is there are a lot of companies that have gotten there before you. And
Mhm.
you can look to those companies as examples to kind of benchmark against and say, hey, I have 15 units, I want to get to 50, and I see what those leadership teams look like. So, that's often where our perspective can be helpful, is kind of coming in and saying, you might not have thought that you needed X, Y, and Z role, but these are positions you should be thinking about. And here's when you might want to add them. And this is the skill set and the type of person that you might want to be looking for to fill these positions. So that's, from my perspective, big picture, what often goes wrong in those thought processes. And then it's really about, once you've defined the roles that you need, getting a good sense also for what makes someone successful in your unique environment. Because
Mhm.
every group is different, right? And the qualities that make someone successful at your company are very different from the qualities that make someone successful in a totally different type of restaurant group. So it's getting really clear about we can call them core values, or we can call them soft skills. Getting clear on what those things are, which, really the best way to do that is just look at your current team, look at your top performers and say, hey, what are the qualities that kind of unite all of these different people? And those maybe are the things that you should be looking for in the people that you are adding to your leadership team over time.
I'd love to talk to you about deskless workers. In restaurants, we've kind of always been deskless workers. When you think of like restaurant groups, like we were truly hybrid before hybrid came about.
Mhm.
Can you share just a little bit about the technology that you see successful groups using to manage their teams? Obviously in store, and then if they have a corporate office, which I'm guessing most places don't even have, technically corporate offices anymore.
Yeah. Well, look, I think part of what is interesting and challenging about our industry is a lot of our solutions, quote unquote, have been very analog in
Yeah.
the past. And what I see being most successful is when the technologies you're using naturally meet the employee where they're at. So you're using technologies, for example, that employees can easily access and interact with on their smartphone. That's a really great example. One I can think of in the world of HR is Opus, which is a training platform that's text-based and again meets the employees on a device that they're actively using in a format that they're used to interacting with. Same thing with communication tools, whether it's Slack or WhatsApp or a scheduling
Yep.
software. We find that adoption is always a challenge with technology from an HR perspective because you're frankly trying to access employees who are not particularly tech savvy sometimes. So meet them on a tool that they are comfortable using with an app that they're comfortable using and try to limit the number of apps also that you're
Yeah.
requiring them to engage with. If you can find one or two that you can use to drive all the critical information to them, scheduling, updates, payroll information, the fewer apps they have to interact with, the better.
I think I mean, what's really interesting is I remember, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, talking to Slack and asking them, their sales team and managers on their sales team to give me restaurant group case studies of successful restaurants that were utilizing Slack. And they had no case studies for me. Like I couldn't get Slack to give me anything. Yet, now we run Slack for Cali BBQ Media. We don't use it for Cali BBQ. Cali BBQ, we're more, iPhone based, sending text messages and using 7 shifts. Um, can you share a little bit about deeper on the technology communication side? Because I mean, the core of what we do on this show is talk about content, commerce, communication, and community. Those are 4 C's that all live within that smartphone device, and the hospitality, the magic that happens between the interconnectivity of all of those things, really
Mhm.
from a communication standpoint. Like if you aren't communicating and thinking as a parent, I have to get communicated on WhatsApp for my son's basketball. I've got to get on, I believe, email for his soccer. There's a separate class dojo app for, his school. And it's like all of these different tools just for me as a parent, let alone me as an employer, let alone me as part of a team and part of an organization, which is why we do this show and we have conversations like this, because until we take a step back, we don't realize like our
Yeah.
life has become more complicated. There's a lot of different ways that we need to communicate, but how do we simplify it as employers? Like, how
Yeah.
are we going to run our restaurant group if we can't run and manage all of the other things? Like, if I have to deal with it, what makes me think that my pitmaster doesn't have to deal with that?
Yeah,
You
well,
know,
and your employees are experiencing
Mhm.
exactly the same overload, and probably have less ability in a way to digest all of that, right? So, uh, you know, again, I really like to keep it simple. So I think about like when we're building, for example, a full kind of tech stack for a client, where do we start? Well, generally speaking, I want to start with which solution is going to protect a client from a compliance perspective, right? And we obviously in New York specifically, that's a huge concern.
Yep.
And then second is from an employee experience perspective, how can we keep this really simple and accessible? And
Yep.
so when we start with the employee use case, thinking about one technology that can do most of the things you need it to do from an employee communication perspective. So I know, for example, that my employee is always going to need to check their schedule. So
Yep.
whatever tool you're using for scheduling, you're guaranteed to have employees engaging with that tool. Now the question is, all right, we're going to pick a tool that can do the most things while also delivering the schedule. So if I can deliver the schedule, I can communicate updates to them and share pay stubs, for example, or other kind of logistical pieces involved with their employment. That's going to be the best experience from their perspective, and it's
Mhm.
going to result in the most absorption of information, right? So I know, for example, we have a client recently that was trying to get employees to engage on their payroll platform more frequently. And the idea was, well, if we create a dashboard that lives in ADP, maybe employees will go read those updates and then they can also get their benefits information and they can download their pay stub. And I'm going to tell you 100% that's not going to happen. Nobody, I can't, and I'll tell you too, I know as an employee,
Yeah.
when's the last time I've logged into my payroll platform,
I
right?
mean, you bring up such a good point. I'm so happy that you talk about it because just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. And the resources that you need to execute it correctly, because just
Mhm.
because it's mobile first and it's a web page doesn't mean that people are going to log in to access the information because chances are it's probably impossible. The person that
Right.
actually developed it, they don't even go on it to download it.
Right. And, look, not to mention, another kind of case study we went through with a client who was, again, trying to get employees to engage through their payroll platform on
Yep.
their smartphones. We realized that it wasn't even enabled for Spanish communication.
Believe it.
So, what
Yep.
is a Spanish speaking employee going to do if they need information about payroll? They need to go on their desktop and they need to log in and get information that way.
I won't even go on a desktop, let alone make my employees go to do that.
No,
I mean, it's
it's
crazy.
just, it's common sense, right?
Yeah.
And I think we have to stop thinking optimistically about how we can get employees to engage with these tools and think realistically about it. Like
Yeah.
what's going to work for them in their life and naturally fit into the way they already communicate.
Yeah. I think so much of the problem with technology and technology companies is that there's too many underlying assumptions where if you confuse, you lose. Like if we can just get down to the basics of like we need text-based communication
Mhm.
onto a mobile device, like let's start there. Forget
Mhm.
about all the other bells and whistles and things that we're trying to do and these ideal worlds and the data
Yeah.
that we're going to get and the minefields and like all this stuff. Like how about we just do what we're supposed to do? And that's let's
Yeah.
communicate with our team members. I'd love for
Yeah.
you to talk a little bit about what's the secret to recruiting in this modern era of running restaurants.
Whew, that's a big question. So I think look, tactically, there are a lot of things that companies can do better to attract talent, right? And just from having a clear process, representing your brand accurately in the ads that you have posted, being active on all the job sites, right? Because you're pulling from different pools of candidates on each one, having a consistent interview process and training the people who are interviewing employees, right? These are pretty simple things. But I think, one overarching opportunity that I see across the board is representing who your brand is really clearly and also not being afraid to represent what it's not.
Yeah.
So if one using our own company as an example, right? We're hiring slightly different people, right? But the concepts are still the same. Our work is not for everybody, right? We interview hundreds of HR professionals a year, and while all of them might be interested in what we're doing, they're not going to be interested in the way that we work, right?
Yeah.
Which is pretty intense. It's mostly remote. It's a lot of kind of switching gears, supporting different clients and different businesses. Some people love that. Other people don't love that, and that's okay. And I think just being open as a restaurant group to say, hey, here's what our environment is like. We had a client that was one of our very first clients 8 years ago, and they were kind of like a rock and roll culture. They were famous for having tattoo artists at their company holiday party. Like
Oh, wow.
this is like a cool, very unique employment environment.
Hmm.
And they had a lot of luck actually attracting and retaining talent because it's this, particular type of employee who
Yeah.
thought that was super awesome, but it's not for everyone. And so I think while not every company has as extreme an example as having a tattoo artist at your holiday party, like think about those examples that you can highlight that really tells an employee what you're all about as a company and how you're different from other workplaces. That both helps you stand out in the crowd, which is really important. And it ensures that people who pursue an opportunity with you really know what they're getting into.
So if you guys are listening to this, I'm going to get my own homework assignment, which is something that I'm a huge fan of Donald Miller. He does building a story brand, but he talks about values and more specifically the problem that companies have with creating their mission statement and their values is that they don't create what do we stand against. This is what we stand for, which gets very big and
Mm,
bold and pious and pie in the sky. But if you start with what do you stand against, now all of a sudden you get to the truth. And the truth is, well, if I stand against this, then what do you stand for becomes much clearer.
yeah,
So, as a takeaway from this, I'm going to do my own homework and figure out with my team for Cali Barbecue and Cali BBQ Media, what do we stand against? Because
I
once we
love
figure
that.
out what we stand against and we are bold in our beliefs, Simon Sinek talks about his unlock as a speaker was once he started, instead of talking about what did he do, he started talking about what do I believe.
Mm,
And once he started talking about what do I believe, then he started getting all of these speaking opportunities. And then he started writing books and talking about the beliefs that we have, not only for the things that we stand for, but the things that we stand against, that we don't tolerate. Um, it's a different way of thinking about it. I think, especially from an employer's standpoint, because we don't want, and we're in the hospitality business, so we want to be inclusive. We want to welcome all walks of life. But
right.
if we're honest, we really don't want all walks of life. There are things that we do not tolerate in the four walls of our restaurant. And if we don't tolerate them, why can't we talk about the reasons why we don't tolerate them?
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I'll share one really foundational book that shaped how I think about recruiting. It's called Hiring for Attitude, and it's by an author, Mark Murphy. And one of the anecdotes he shares is about Southwest Airlines
Hmm.
and the interview process they instituted to test the sense of humor of the pilots that they were interviewing. And what they did was they put the pilots in a waiting room and they cranked up the heat. So it was like 90 degrees, and these pilots are sitting there sweating. And at one point, someone comes into the room and says, "Hey, if any of you want, I have these ugly brown shorts, and you can change into them for your interview if you feel uncomfortable." And the idea was that, these pilots who were very buttoned up and wearing all of their official suiting would only take the ugly brown shorts if they had a sense of humor.
That's
Now,
fantastic.
I don't know how effective that was, but I love that as a concept because I think we all have an ugly brown shorts test that we could kind of put candidates through to see if they're a perfect fit.
That is magical. So anything for our audience, best, I mean, it's hard to give one takeaway, but something that as we're looking to 2025, things that from an HR standpoint, things that we should be looking out for or maybe proactively doing.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like so much of HR is reactive, which I mean, obviously you're there for the reactive part, but you prefer to help build the foundation of restaurant groups and their compliance and how they take care of their people and recruit their people on the proactive side. What are things that we should be thinking about?
I think it actually goes back to what we were talking about before with meeting employees where they are.
Yeah.
And, it goes to the technologies that you're choosing to use to communicate with them, but it also goes to, I mean, really, we've been doing a lot of engagement surveys with clients recently to see what employees really want and need to thrive in their workplace. And today, more than ever, employees are individuals, right? Everyone needs something different, and everyone expects that their company will care about them as an individual and care about what they need and what they want. And so I think it's listening is probably the biggest takeaway, listening to what your employees need, listening to kind of what tools they're using to communicate in their daily lives and how you can streamline that conversation with them, listening to the things that they are seeing other employers doing that they find exciting or interesting. And, those I think, and it goes to culture as well, right? Listening to what their values are as an individual and whether those values actually match up with who you are as a business or if they don't match, and that's okay. So I think that's, look, our workplace is evolving really, really quickly. And the one thing that I know as an HR professional is HR is not going to look in 2 years the way it does today.
Yep.
And the only way we can keep up is by listening to employees. So that's what I would leave you with.
That's amazing. It's Sarah Diehl, Diehl. You can find her on LinkedIn. You're going on lots of other shows, which I appreciate. I encourage you to do more of that. We need more thought leadership from someone like you that's boots on the ground, working and helping restaurants with these difficult, complex laws that we have to comply with, but also these are I mean, this is our career. This is what we've chosen to do. It's not an easy business. It's a beautiful business if you do it right, if you build the right team around you. If you guys are listening to this, we'd love for you to join us on a live podcast. You can follow us on LinkedIn, Cali BBQ Media. We do live shows every Wednesday, every Friday. You can reach out to me at Shawn P. Walchef. I'll send you the link to the room, but we want to hear about your restaurant. We want to hear your story. No one's coming to tell your story. The more reps that you get in, the better that you get at doing this. Sarah, is there anything else? Where can people learn more about Empowered?
So you can check us out on www.empoweredhospitality.com. Follow us on LinkedIn. We're constantly posting news and updates. And just thank you so much, Shawn, for hosting me and for creating this amazing platform. It's been a really fun conversation.
Absolutely. We appreciate it. As always, stay curious, get involved, and don't be afraid to ask for help. We'll catch you guys next episode. Thank you.